Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and welcome back to Varis Explained, Part 2. If this is your first time seeing this, make sure you check out our previous video where we cover the Rocket and Topologic monsters. Today, we're going to be covering the Borrel cards, the big payoff for Revolver strategy, but first, we have a lot of miscellaneous cards to cover. It wasn't just Rockets that made up the main deck, but a number of other Dark Dragon and Machine monsters as well. Not to mention some, well, let's just say that Varis might be a bit of a Yugiboomer. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Chobham Armored Dragon is a level 1 dragon monster with 0 attack and defense, and when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand in attack position, and if you do, for the rest of the turn, it can't be destroyed by battle, and the battle damage you take from battles involving this card is halved. If this card is sent to the grave as link material, you can target one other dark monster in your grave and add it to your hand. Also, your opponent can add a monster from their grave to their hand. Now, summoning this in attack position is rough, but hey, half damage is better than full damage, and you get some recovering when you link it off. The problem is that your opponent also gets to recycle a monster, and while in the anime that can be written around, in the game itself, giving your opponent any hand trap they want back or some kind of engine piece they want is patently absurd. The card you'll aim to get back will have to be extraordinarily powerful to balance that out. And I don't know what that card would have to be at the moment, but I do know that the armor is giving off big Gundam energy, and I love that. Ooh, or Liger Zero Panzer mode. God, I miss Zoids. Overflow Dragon is a level 1 dragon monster with 0 attack and defense, and when any number of monsters on the field are destroyed by a card effect, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then, if 2 or more monsters on the field were destroyed by that effect, you can special summon an Overflow token, which is a level 1 dark dragon monster. So this is a little insurance policy to help get you some bodies if your monsters get wiped, though it can be used offensively. It only checks to see if monsters on the field are destroyed, not just yours. So if you hit your opponent with a Raigeki, you'd still get to summon this, and if they had 2 or more monsters when you did that, that's 2 free link materials, which you can use for whatever you want. It's really cool that you've got a monster that can cover you from both angles, so no matter what happens, you'll always be able to go with the Overflow. Sniffer Dragon is a level 2 dragon monster with 800 attack and 400 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add another copy of Sniffer Dragon from your deck to your hand. Yeah, just one summon and you get another in your hand to keep the chain going, ensuring you have material for future turns for more link summons. And there's some other things to talk about when it comes to this monster, but let's be real, you're already in the comments typing Sniffa because you're a bunch of meme lords, so I'm not even gonna bother. Triggering Worm is a level 2 dragon monster with 600 attack and defense, and if this card is sent to the grave as link material for the link summon of a dark monster, you can special summon this card from your grave in attack position to your zone that link monster points to, but it cannot be used as link material. And if this card is destroyed or banished by an effect activated by a link monster, you draw a card. So the main idea is to link this into something that will get rid of the reborn worm so you can get that draw. And as it just so happens, we have the perfect monsters for it, the Topologics. Summoning it back to any of their zones will, well, trigger their effects, which will get rid of Worm, as well as any number of your opponent's cards. And I cannot believe it took me this long to realize that's why it's called Triggering Worm. Triggering things is the whole reason this card exists! And here I was about to make fun of it for having the worst spelling of worm in the game, but truly, I was the worm in this scenario. Defrag Dragon is a level 3 dragon monster with 1000 attack and 600 defense, and you can special summon this card from your hand by sending any other monster from your hand to the grave. You can only special summon copies of this card once per turn this way. And if this card is in your grave, you can banish 3 monsters from your grave with the same name except copies of this card, and special summon this card. This means Defrag Dragons work well in either one of 2 decks. Ones that have you playing a lot of playsets of monsters, or you're playing one of those decks that has monsters that all end up with the same name in their graveyard, like Harpy Ladies or Cyber Dragons, which seems like a pretty good deal, because in that scenario, you'd only be getting rid of a defragment of their power. Hibernation Dragon is a level 3 dragon monster with 600 attack and 1500 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a level 4 or lower dragon monster in your grave and add it to your hand. While you control no link monsters, except during the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a dark dragon link monster in your grave and special summon it. Wait, this one actually sounds pretty legit. It recovers you a card on summon and reborns a Dark Dragon Link on a future turn if you don't already have any in play. If not for that last turn delay, this sounds like it would be a Dragon Link staple. But in the end, I do think they're right to pass this one over. But if you find yourself in some kind of limited or sealed environment and this card is part of the pool, do yourself a favor and make sure you don't sleep on it. DMZ Dragon is a level 4 dragon monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you can target a level 4 or lower dragon monster in your grave and a monster you control. Equip that monster in your grave to that monster on the field as an equip spell that makes it gain 500 attack, and at the end of the damage step, if your monster equipped with an equipped card attacked, you can banish this card from your grave to destroy as many cards as possible equipped to that monster you control, and if you do, that monster can make a second attack in a row. So it feels like the prescribed combo is to summon this alongside a dragon, equip a small dragon to that other monster, providing it a little boost, then you find a way to get DMZ into the grave so you can get the second attack in after the initial attack with your equipped dragon. That's is fine, I suppose, but it is a lot of hoops to jump through to get a second attack. Now, people smarter than me are going to have to find out how any of this relates back to the DMZ of computer technology, because all I can think of with this card is demilitarized zones, and folks, getting to attack more with giant dragons just doesn't seem to fit the bill. Gateway Dragon is a level 4 dragon monster with 1600 attack and 1400 defense, and if your opponent controls a link monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And you can only special summon copies of this card once per turn this way. Also once per turn, you can special summon a level 4 or lower dark dragon monster from your hand. I could actually see this being a fantastic little card during Master Rule 4's initial run. You basically had to run link monsters if you wanted your deck to function. So not only did you get this monster out for free, but another dragon without ever having to commit your normal summon. It's no summon from deck kind of effect, but if your deck was geared towards dark dragons, you were probably sitting on a few in your hand anyway. Though, now that we live under the Master Rule 4 revision, that's not quite as universal as it once was, though not impossible. It's a pretty good card, but still ranks pretty low on my favorite gateway cards of all times list. It's certainly no of the 6, but really, what is? Background Dragon is a level 5 dragon monster with 1600 attack and 1800 defense, and if this card is in the grave and you control no cards, you can special summon both this card and a level 4 or lower dragon monster from your hand in defense position, but banish this card when it leaves the field. That's actually a pretty killer first move. Use Foolish Burial or Dragon Shrine to bin this, turbo out some monsters, and now you've got 2 material to work with. It's kind of like Gateway, but with more possibilities to actually brick. I mean, if this ends up in your hand, then it's good discard fodder, but at worst, you can actually normal summon Gateway Dragon to get things going. This one has no backup plan. It only works in specific situations, and with better options out there, we don't really have many reasons to go to bat for this one. Maybe there are some support cards that go really well with this, but before you commit too heavily, you'll want to make sure you do a background dragon check. And speaking of which, Checksum Dragon is a level 6 dragon monster with 400 attack and 2400 defense, and when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, then gain life points equal to half this card's defense. Also, this attack position card cannot be destroyed by battle. So unless some other effect is in play, Checksum is going to gain you 1200 life points when it hits the board, and with 2400 defense, it'll withstand a lot of punishment. And if the opponent has something bigger than that and you want to keep this around, it'll cost you a hefty chunk of life points, but you can summon this in attack position to prevent its battle destruction. It's an odd battle fader to be sure, but it's level 6, and that's a pretty good segue into any rank 6 monster like Hieratic Dragon King of Atum. And to access that, many dragon decks would pay a handsome checksum. Link Belt Wall Dragon is a level 6 Earth Dragon, how daring, with 0 attack and 2100 defense that cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned by its own effect, which is, when you link summon, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, place 2 counters on it. If a monster is link summoned, remove 2 counters from this card, or all of them if there are less than 2. Once per turn, during each standby phase, place one of those counters on Link Belt Wall Dragon, and while on the field, no monster can be Link summoned unless this card has at least as many of those counters on it as the Link rating of the monster you want to Link summon. Also while on the field, monsters can't attack except Link monsters. So, how in the world is this all supposed to work? Basically, it's saying that you're not able to Link summon anything unless the rating of that Link monster is at or below the number of counters on Link Belt. So when summoned, it has 2 counters, so you can Link summon a Link 2 monster, at which point it loses 2 counters, effectively keeping both players from Link summoning at that point. This cap is raised by 1 during each standby phase, as it gets a counter during that time, so as long as this is on the field, the amount of Link monsters that can be summoned grinds to a slow crawl, and would see some level of play during early Link days as a way to floodgate the mechanic, blindsiding most players, partly because they had never heard of this card, and partly because the effect text is a horrifying slurry of rules nonsense. As of now, it doesn't really see any competitive play, really just standing as a testament to Varis' crusade against Link monsters, as well as another tool in the stun player's bag of tricks. But whatever you do, keep these monsters away from heavy weapons Gaia. Link belts have been hunted to near extinction because of that guy. Noctivision Dragon is a level 7 dragon monster with 0 attack and 2800 defense, and when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets any number of face-down cards you control, as a quick effect, you can banish this card from your grave to negate that effect. Also, your opponent can't target those face-down cards with card effects for the rest of the turn. If any number of dark dragon monsters are special summoned to your field, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is sent to the grave as Link material, you can draw a card. This actually has seen some play as an extender in Dragon Link decks. It's a free summon alongside your myriad Dark Dragons, gives you a way to draw when you link with it, and randomly provides protection to your face-down cards, which is all very funny. And while that protection banishes it, you could just as easily keep summoning this back from the grave with a card like Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, and now you have yourself a little bit of a draw engine going, giving you more cards to deal with more situations. Which means that, with this card by your side, you'll never have to take a shot in the dark. Cracking Dragon is a level 8 machine monster with 3000 attack and 0 defense. It can't be destroyed by battle with a monster that has an equal or lower level than it, and when your opponent normal or special summons exactly one monster and no other monsters are summoned while this monster is on the field, you can make that monster lose attack equal to its level times 200 until the end of the turn, and if you do, burn your opponent for damage equal to the amount of attack lost by this effect. The obligatory monster with core protection made to interact poorly against the new mechanic monster. Basically, this checks for levels, which gets cleared by just about any Link monster of comparable power, though it also gets washed by Xyz, which I don't think was the intention. Though I have to say, this card is actually kinda scary. The burn effect is not once per turn, so if this is around while your opponent goes on a big summoning spree, you could get away with doing a lot of damage for free. It's like a low-key tax dragon in that regard, especially since it also debuffs those monsters for the turn. Just keep in mind how the damage is calculated. If the opponent summons a level 4 monster but has less than 800 attack, let's say 500, we'll try to reduce them by 800 because 4 times 200 is 800, but because the opponent only lost 500 attack, you only deal 500 damage. So while it may not be the most spectacular boss monster ever built, the kinds of things it can get away with are kinda cracked. Actually, while we're here, I'd like to take a bit of a detour, because while Varis does use Cracking Dragon for a bit, it's much more well known as the workhorse of the foot soldiers of the Knights of Hanoi, and they have their own little suite of support cards to help it out. And I'm not really going to get a chance to do the Knights of Hanoi explained, so I'll take this opportunity to talk about Hackworm, a level 1 dark machine monster with 400 attack and 0 defense, and if your opponent controls no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. Wow, a free monster you can drop from your hand if your opponent's board is empty, regardless of what yours looks like. It's kinda like a solitaire player's dream. It even kinda looks like a baby Cracking Dragon, and if this one's the infant, our next one is the awkward teenager. Jack Wyvern is a level 4 dark machine monster with 1800 attack and 0 defense that lets you banish this card and a face-up machine monster you control to target a dark monster in your grave and special summon it. What I like is that you don't necessarily have to be playing a dark machine deck to make this work. You just need a machine to defeat it so you can get back any dark monster. But the idea is to use your hackworms as either tribute fodder or as cards to feed Jack Wyvern to get Cracking Dragon out of your grave. Also, I think I'm just stealing this card's name for a character. Having someone named Jack Wyvern is at least a 2x cool multiplier. Lastly, we have Air Cracking Storm, an equipped spell card you can only equip to a machine monster. When this attacking monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can activate this effect so that it can make a second attack during this battle phase, and your other monsters cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. This card is funny because for all the effects that Cracking Dragon has, none of them are particularly battle related, so I guess they just wanted to make this a more imposing threat during battle. It only gives a second attack too, so no wiping an opponent's board by continuing to rip their monsters apart. Maybe there's a machine monster out there that wants this kind of effect to the detriment of its teammates, but I can't really think of any at the moment. Decks like Cyber Dragon already have strong multi-attack effects, so for this to be effective, we need a perfect cracking storm of factors. Alright, let's get back on track with some Link monsters. Twin Triangle Dragon is a Link 2 dragon monster with 1200 attack, requiring 2 level 4 or lower dragon monsters except tokens as material. When this card is Link summoned, you can pay 500 life points, then target 1 level 5 or higher monster in your grave and special summon it to your zone this card points to, but it can't attack. Also, its effects are negated, which means you're basically only using this to climb the Link ladder, which, hey, ain't that bad. Especially if you bring back something like Knock Division, because while its effects on the field are negated, the effects that will trigger in the grave will be more than live. Also, cool touch that the triangles look like Gateway Dragon's gates for some really good continuity with how they were used in the anime. Though it is clearly trying to compensate for its lack of power with geometry. The triangle may be the strongest shape in nature, but what if they had 2 triangles? Flash Charge Dragon is a Link 3 dragon monster with 2300 attack, requiring 2 or more dragon monsters as material. You can't summon or set monsters to zones this card points to because, once again, they were allergic to V-Links at the time, and once per turn, if any number of monsters are normal or special summoned to a zone this card points to, except during the damage step, you can destroy 1 monster this card points to, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. And when a card or effect is activated that targets this face-up card as a quick effect, you can tribute a monster to negate the activation. This card has one of 2 modes. Either you play it to your EMZ and threaten half of the zones your opponent has access to, or you get it into your main monster zone and threaten one or both of the EMZs, effectively keeping you from using the extra deck, at least at time of printing, while making it much harder for your opponent to use Link monsters. Also, it comes with a way to negate effects pointed at it, which is kind of funny. This monster never really caught on, but does have some familiar design principles that we'd see in the Topologics, giving us a clear showcase of how to do these effects well. The real question is, how much am I going to have to shell out for an RC car version because Flash Charge Dragon's design rips? Triple Burst Dragon is a Link 3 dragon monster with 2400 attack, requiring 2 or more monsters except tokens as material. Once per turn during the damage step, when a spell card, trap card, or monster effect is activated as a quick effect, you can negate the activation. It deals piercing battle damage, and during your main phase, except the turn this card was special summoned, you can tribute this card, then target a Link 2 or lower monster in your grave and special summon it. Then you can special summon a level 4 or lower dragon monster from your hand. This is a pretty monumental monster for a lot of reasons. As a largely generic Link 3, this makes for a great stop along most summoning chains that don't have a more specialized option. If you're worried about floating effects when you run over an opponent's monster, this answers them, kind of making it a pseudo-Armades, and even helps to push damage through defensive setups. Because of all these factors, this card has a number of utility cases. Personally, I remember when this was the Link of choice when going up against Sky Striker decks. Because if this ran over one of their Link monsters, it would prevent Ray's effect of replacing it to keep the chain going. However, the oft-forgotten third effect is fascinating, because it's kind of like a D-Synchro or D-Fusion, a D-Link if you will, letting you recycle any of your Link 2 or below monsters from the graveyard, of which there are a lot of options, and gets you a small dragon out of your hand for free. Now, in today's breakneck pace of play, this is more famous as the link monster you use for a downward pointing arrow to enable Guard Dragon Pisty, before linking it off into something like Borrel Dragon, but that doesn't detract from its significance. And with a grin like that, you can tell that it's loving every moment of the spotlight. Vorticular Drumgun is a Link 3 dragon monster with 1000 attack, requiring 3 Dark Dragon monsters as material. If this card is special summoned, you can draw a card, and if this effect resolves, the unused monster zones that this card points to cannot be used for the rest of the turn. So this is... Okay, so on the initial summon, it's a -1. You use 3 monsters to make this, and you get a draw. The additional trade-off is the zones that you can't use, if it points to any unused ones. But the trigger effect triggers anytime it's special summoned, not just on Link Summon, so revival effects can bring this back and net you a draw, though you once again lose your unused zones. This can be mitigated by having monsters in the zones that it points to, and that's kinda cool in and of itself. But with such a steep onboarding cost and not a particularly thrilling payout, it's no wonder why you probably haven't heard of this card until right now. Still, there is something to be said for a monster that marches to the beat of its own drumgun. Alright, that does it for the monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps that Varis kept in his back pocket. Link Burst is a normal spell card that targets a Link monster you control and a monster your opponent controls, destroys them, then draws you a card. This reads a lot like Gemini Spark, but where that quick play spell was the cornerstone of Hero Beat when that deck was around, this card is just kind of okay. In the anime, this destroyed Booster Dragon, which itself has an on-destruction effect, which brings attention to the fact that any links with similar effects can be enabled by this card, but that's about as complex as it gets. I guess those twin triangles weren't so strong after all, huh? Dragonoid Generator is a continuous spell card that you activate by paying 1000 life points. During your main phase, you can special summon a Dragonoid token, which is a level 1 Earth Machine monster with 300 attack and defense in attack position. Also, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Also, during the end phase, your opponent special summons a Dragonoid token to their field in attack position, even if this card leaves the field. And you can use this effect up to twice per turn. So, to clarify, you pay 1000 life points to get this onto the field. You don't pay that cost again whenever you go for the token summoning effect. This gives you some pretty slick tokens that you can use for tribute summoning, since accessing the extra deck just got a bit rougher. But you also have to be okay with giving your opponent material for their own summons, because they're not going to have to deal with the same restrictions. But that's not entirely a bad thing. There has been a pivot towards actually benefiting from your opponent getting monsters, as it shuts down certain board breakers, but it gets a little less good when it keeps you from using the extra deck. Not to mention that your opponent only gets those tokens during the end phase, so any effects that would rely on your opponent having a monster just aren't going to work. I could see this re-emerging as some kind of strange tech pick in an archetype or pile deck down the line, taking advantage of some strange game design quirk or another, and I look forward to the controversy that that's going to generate. Fire Prison is a field spell card that gives all dragon monsters on the field a 300 defense point boost. If any Link monsters are on the field, neither player can Link summon a Link monster with a lower Link rating than the highest Link rating on the field. Monsters can't attack except for Link monsters, and while 2 or more Cyberse Link monsters are on the field, you negate the activated effects of all Cyberse monsters, and Cyberse monsters can't attack, can't be targeted for attacks, and can't be targeted by card effects. Yeah, this was basically custom built to be an anti-playmaker card. It hits every single thing you'd ever expect the guy to play, and it gets really goofy when Link Belt Wall Dragon gets involved. Fire Prison basically says you can't perform a Link summon unless that Link monster is at or above the highest Link rating on the field, but Link Belt only lets you Link summon if its rating is at or lower than the number of counters that it has. So you'd have to wait for a Link Belt to accumulate enough counters to perform a bigger Link summon. Now, that's about as anime as it gets, and the real solution here is to just use removal to get rid of one or both of these cards. Neither have any particularly robust fortitude. But the idea is pretty cool, and if anything, we did get a very funny episode of progression playoffs out of it, so it all kind of evens out. Magical Cylinders is a normal trap card that sets a magic cylinder directly from your deck or graveyard, and if set from the deck, it can be activated this turn. And when you activate Magic Cylinder, you can banish this card from your grave to double the damage inflicted to your opponent. Now, this card isn't even used by Varis, but you know what he does play? Magic Cylinder. You probably actually picked up on that. This is kind of like legacy support, and I have to say, the flavoring of the cylinders as bullet casings, beautiful stuff. Now, the drawback is that if your opponent attacks, you can't activate cylinders, set original cylinder, and activate it to that same attack, even if you set it from the deck, enabling you to activate it the turn it was set, because it'll miss the activation timing. So you'll have to set it before the attack is declared, which kind of robs you of the surprise factor. But it does make for an excellent deterrent, especially with that damage doubling effect. So don't expect to actually pull this off, but honestly, it's just good to see that even Revolver appreciates the classics. And speaking of classics, we have Mind Crush. Yeah, Mind Crush, a normal trap card that has you declaring a card name, and if that card is in your opponent's hand, they must discard all copies of it. Otherwise, you discard a random card. A short effect, but with monumental consequences. This was, for a time, one of the most powerful trap cards in the game. Like, yeah, if you call it right, you get to rip 1, maybe 2, 3 if you have the Mandate of Heaven, out of your opponent's hand. But it was more than that, because under some old rules, if the card you discarded didn't account for all legal copies of that card, for instance, let's say you call Mystic Tomato and your opponent discards 1, but across all public information zones your opponent only has that one Mystic Tomato, your opponent was obligated to show their hand to confirm this was done, and that meant you got perfect hand knowledge, one of the most valuable things you can have in this game. This card made search effects a liability, because as per rules of the game, you have to reveal any kind of search to your opponent if the card you're searching has a specific quality, and that gives away exactly the kind of information the user of Mind Crush needs. But even without that knowledge, there are still a lot of reasons to shotgun this card. Maybe you've identified that only a single card can break your board, so risking a random discard is more than worthwhile to ensure your opponent either doesn't have it or getting rid of it. Maybe you want to discard a card really bad, so you call something outrageous that can't possibly be true. So you get the discard, and bonus, still get to confirm your opponent's hand. You just have to make sure that both players have at least one card in hand, because you can't risk discarding a card getting it wrong if you don't have any cards in your hand to discard. While at the height of its power, this card was a competitive staple for years. You just couldn't escape it. It was somehow a better trap dust shoot. But then, everything changed. As of now, you are no longer allowed to check your opponent's hidden information zones to confirm if it's been fully resolved. You just have to trust your opponent. If you Mind Crush an Ash Blossom and your opponent only discards 1, you've got to trust that it's the only one they have. If you use Lullaby of Obedience for a card and your opponent says they don't have it, you no longer get to search their deck to confirm this. Now, does this open up the floor for a little bit of tomfoolery? Sure. And to protect myself from any explaining how to cheat allegations, I'm just going to leave it at that. But is it better for the game overall? Honestly, I think so. Gaining that kind of additional information is really, really strong, and for it to be a secondary benefit to such low investment cards is pretty ridiculous. And honestly, while I always encourage everyone to be wary of their surroundings during a tournament, it's just better for the community that we don't go into events like this with this mindset that our opponents are always trying to pull one over on us, at least from angles outside the game. And all of this in this episode because a character from Vrains used a DM-era card that no other character actually used. This is not where I thought this episode was going. And we're not done yet. Mirror Force Launcher is a continuous trap card that, once per turn, during your main phase, you can discard a monster to add a Mirror Force from your deck or grave to your hand. If this set card is destroyed by an opponent's card effect and sent to the grave, you can set this card from your grave and a Mirror Force from your hand, deck, or grave, and they can both be activated that turn. Now, keep in mind, this looks for Mirror Force specifically, not any of the various flavors of it. It punishes your opponent for trying to remove it by making the Mirror Force happen even faster, and once it is deployed, you can turn monsters into Mirror Forces, making your opponent's attacks that much more difficult to commit to. It's also probably the reason why we got magical cylinders in the first place, to carry on the tradition of Varis having high-tech modern gadgets to fix up old favorites. But once your opponent is aware of what you're doing, don't expect them to fall right into it. There's no such thing as a free launch, after all. Remote Rebirth is a normal trap card that targets a monster in your opponent's grave and special summons it to an opponent's main monster zone your link monster points to. This is basically another way to trigger the topologic monster effects, though could potentially see play in any deck with opposing facing link arrows to get their effects online. Which does technically mean that just about any deck is capable of running the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare Lock. Oh, but it's Sanctifier, that's the problem. No, I'm not biased! Red Reboot is a counter trap card that, when your opponent activates a trapped card, you negate the activation of it, and if you do, set that card face down. Then, that opponent can set another trapped card directly from their deck. However, for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, your opponent can't activate trap cards. But the big kicker is the last line, that allows you to activate this card from your hand by paying half your life points. This card was a side deck staple on and off since its release, giving you a pretty comprehensive way to answer all trap cards. Just make it so your opponent can't use them at all. It hardly even matters that your opponent gets an extra trap card because they can't use it. And because you're normally going to be using this on your turn, you'll be in a position to close out the game so you won't even have to worry about the downsides if you're aggressive enough. And while I personally love that we get to stuff it to all those annoying trap card decks, it is best for the game that it is currently banned. We all hate lingering floodgate effects, and in all fairness, this is one of them. And shutting off a whole portion of the game is just not gonna be healthy, even if it does mean I can no longer auto-win against my lifelong nemesis, Altergeist! Alright, now it's time for the part we've all been waiting for, the Borrel Monsters. A series of dark dragon monsters with some heinous effects, as well as some themed spells and traps. Borrel Riot Dragon is a level 8 ritual monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense that you can ritual summon with the card Heavy Interlock. When your opponent special summons any number of monsters as a quick effect, you can negate the special summon, and if you do, destroy those monsters. Then, destroy this card or a rocket monster you control. If this card is in your grave, you can target a Borrel or rocket monster in your grave to destroy a card you control or in your hand, and if you do, add that target to your hand. But as with most ritual monsters, you don't get the full picture until you talk about the ritual spell. Heavy Interlock is a ritual spell card that can ritual summon Riot Dragon by attributing monsters from your hand or field, but you can also destroy rocket monsters from your hand or face-up field as well, whose total levels equal up to 8 or more. The monster special summoned by this effect can't be destroyed by battle with a monster special summoned from the extra deck, and is unaffected by the activated effects of monsters special summoned from the extra deck. So on top of Riot Dragon being immune to most anything extra deck related, Heavy Interlock will also trigger your rocket floating effects, which you otherwise wouldn't get if you just attributed them like most other ritual spells. As for what role the monster plays, Riot keeps your opponent off of inherent summons, but even if you never summon it, this ritual still puts in work from the graveyard, popping one of your cards to put a rocket monster, or a Borrel if need be, from your grave into your hand, giving you a way to recycle and enable your monsters. It's even searchable with pre-preparation of rights if you're of a mind to play him. This is also where Double Disruptor Dragon comes in. Once you get that in the graveyard, it can search you Heavy Interlock, as well as another card we'll talk about in a moment, as well as being the full 8 levels needed to summon out Riot Dragon. But you have to be really committed to the bit. If you plan on making the most of this, you're gonna want to make sure you have all of your Riot gear. Borrel Furious Dragon is a level 8 fusion monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring 2 Dark Dragon monsters as material. As a quick effect, it can target a monster you control and a card your opponent controls and destroy them, and you can banish this card from your grave, then target a Dark Link monster in your grave and special summon it, but it can't activate its effects this turn. And while it's not necessary to summon this, let's also take a look at the intended fusion spell, Rapid Trigger. A quick play spell card that fusion summons a fusion monster from your extra deck by destroying the materials listed on it from your field, but it can only attack monsters special summoned from the extra deck. Also, it's unaffected by activated effects from any other monsters special summoned from the extra deck. Like Heavy Interlock, it destroys the material so that the rockets can replace themselves during the end phase, and this also makes the monster warded against extra deck summoned monsters. Though since it can only attack those same monsters, it's a little bit of a debuff. And remember, Double Disruptor also grabs that spell. As for Furious itself, while it won't trigger your rocket gunfire effects since Furious is not a link monster, it'll still end up triggering the floating effect, so you can leverage them as removal, which is pretty slick. It's like a Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer at home, and if you ever have to get rid of this, or lose it somehow, you can then banish it to regain access to any of your Dark Links, and while the effects are on a bit of a cooldown, if it survives to future turns, your opponent will be in a lot of trouble, meaning this monster has a lot of tenacity that's going to make your opponent positively furious. Borrel Savage Dragon is a level 8 Synchro monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is Synchro summoned, you can equip a Link monster from your grave to this card, and if you do, place Borrel counters on this card equal to that Link monster's Link rating. This monster gains half of the attack of the monster equipped to it by its effect. And when your opponent activates a card or effect as a quick effect, you can remove a Borrel counter from this card to negate the activation. This is arguably the most famous of the Borrel extra deck monsters, and for good reason. It's a generic Omni negate as long as you have a Link engraved to get those Borrel counters. The more Link rating that it has, the more turns you can use the negate, and the bigger the Link is, the stronger Savage gets, making it even more annoying to deal with. It was a staple in any deck that had the spare tuners and right level combination, as well as the Link monsters needed to complete the process, so it was everywhere, especially in my old other Nemesis's deck, Dragon Link. But at time of recording, this card is currently banned in the TCG, so you no longer have to worry about it over the course of paper play. Now you just have to deal with it in Master Duel, probably the most accessible platform for playing this game. Great. Borrel X-Charge Dragon is a rank 4 Xyz monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring 2 level 4 Dark Dragon monsters as material. Neither player can target this Xyz summoned card with monster effects except its own, and once per turn you can detach a material from this card, then target a face-up monster on the field. It loses 600 attack and defense, then you can special summon a Borrel monster from your grave, but banish it during the end phase. Also, you can't special summon other monsters or attack directly for the rest of the turn. This one never really got off the ground. The targeting protection and stat line is pretty good, especially for a rank 4 monster, but the effect is such a drag. The debuff can help you run over a monster, and our Borrels are very strong, so getting them back gives you a lot of damage. But then you've got that special summon lock, and you can't even attack directly, so if you clear out your opponent's monsters too soon, you won't be able to close out the game. It's not useless, but its use cases are so narrow and require such specific circumstances that you're almost never going to use it, which is a real shame. You can't just capitalize the X in the middle of the name and make the monster suck. It's not fair. Mini Borrel Dragon is a Link 2 monster with 800 attack, requiring 2 rocket monsters as material. If you control a Borrel Link monster while this card is in your grave, you contribute a Link 3 or lower monster to special summon this monster, but it can't be used as material for the Link summon of a monster with the same Link rating as the tributed monster. So Mini Borrel doesn't do anything by itself. It's just kind of a strange ladder climbing tool. Like, if you tribute a Link 1 monster for it, you've increased your total Link rating that you have access to by 1. And in the olden days, this let you get side-pointing Link arrows into your main monster zones to help with your extra deck summons. Today though, it amounts to little more than a cool design. Maybe not a particularly efficient one though. 3 coil off that revolver plus the placement must be hell on that thing's knees. Quad Borrel Dragon is a Link 2 monster with 1000 attack, requiring 2 dragon monsters, including a rocket monster, as material. You can discard a card, then target a face-up monster on the field. You can't special summon Link 2 or lower monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Also, destroy the targeted monster, then if it was a Link monster, you can special summon any number of rocket monsters with different names from your hand or grave up to its Link rating. This is a pretty interesting card, as it has a lot of utility. The immediate usage is to have Quad Borrel destroy itself to summon 2 of your rocket monsters, or you can pop an opponent's monster. Heck, if your opponent has a Link monster, you can pop it and get your rockets, because it doesn't care whose Link you destroy, just that you destroy one. And on top of all that, it's a Link that can target your rockets to trigger their gunfire effects. It's a pretty sweet utility monster, and is probably one of the coolest Borrels we have access to. Having sawed-off shotguns for arms is as groovy as it gets. Borrel Code Dragon is a Link 3 monster with 2500 attack, requiring 2 or more effect monsters as material. This card can be destroyed by card effects while a Link monster points to it, and at the end of the damage step, if this card that was Link summoned using 3 monsters as material battles an opponent's monster, you can destroy all monsters on the field. You can also banish this card from your grave to banish a dark monster with 3000 or more attack from the field, and if you do, special summon a Topologic monster from your extra deck or grave. So this has a lot of connections to the Topologic line of monsters, the shape, the board wipe, and the fact that it can summon out Topologics. Now, if you're able to get a Link monster to point to Code Dragon, it can actually protect itself from its own board wipe, which is kinda cool. It's also notable that you don't have to banish your own dark monster with 3000 or more attack, so if you just so happen to line up against an opponent that has one of those, this turns into very strong removal. Just make sure you don't summon Boros with this if you intend to use it long term, since it won't be able to summon itself back from the banishment since it wasn't summoned properly. See, it doesn't even matter if you're a giant gun dragon, learning coding is always a useful skill. Borrel Guard Dragon is a Link 4 monster with 3000 attack, requiring 3 or more effect monsters as material. It can't be destroyed by card effects, and once per turn, you can send a card from your spell and trap zone to the grave to special summon from either grave to your field a monster that was destroyed and sent there this turn, but negate its effects. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can target a monster on the field and change it to face-up defense position, and your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation. This is our first example of the Link 4 Borrel cycle, and it's one of the least useful. While all of them have the unrespondable quick effect that triggers your rocket, its general utility isn't quite as strong, seeing play more of as a gimmick in decks that involve flip monsters. It being a card that turns spells and traps into monster reborns is cool, but it's only situational and you don't even get to use their effects. I kinda see what's going on here. You want to add some defensive capabilities to the theme, but there's something to be said for specialization. Shooting things is what you're really good at, Borrels. If you want to get defensive with guns, shields aren't the way to go about it. You've got to learn how to do it the Bloodborne way. Start training those gun parries. Borrel Dragon is a Link 4 monster with 3000 attack, requiring 3 or more effect monsters as material. Neither player can target this card with monster effects, and once per turn as a quick effect, you can target a face-up monster on the field and it loses 500 attack and defense, an effect that your opponent cannot respond to. At the start of the damage step, if this card attacks an opponent's monster, you can place that opponent's monster in a zone this card points to and take control of it, but send it to the grave during the end phase of the next turn. This is probably the most iconic of the Borrels. It was the first and hit the game with an immediate impact. Easily one of the best monsters you could be making using the Link mechanic. And it's not hard to see why. Monster targeting protection, a way to weaken monsters so even opposing threats up to 3400 couldn't crack it, and it even stole monsters. This monster is the triple threat, and while many new threats have come to take this monster's place in the extra deck, it's hard to deny that it still holds a certain appeal, a barrel dragon worth playing in the modern age. Borrel Sword Dragon is a Link 4 monster with 3000 attack, requiring 3 or more effect monsters as material. It can't be destroyed by battle, and once per turn as a quick effect, you can target an attack position monster and change it to defense position. Also, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn, and your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation. Once per turn, when this card declares an attack on a face-up monster, you can activate this effect, and until the end of the turn, this card gains attack equal to half that monster's current attack. And if it does, that monster's current attack is halved. Whoa, hey there, I was just joking about the Barrel Dragon comparisons, but this just straight up has Metal Morph on it. Better Metal Morph even. This is probably the most derided of all the Borrel monsters. Not because it's bad, because it's almost too good. This card is a recipe for an OTK strapped to a generic monster you can put in just about any deck. The only limitation here is the material amount, but if you can get the necessary bodies on board, this is a double attacking 3000 body that only gets bigger as it attacks. Run into an attack position monster, and it's basically a direct attack when you factor in the attack absorption. And you get to keep that attack boost for the second attack, so yeah, closing out the game is pretty simple with this. Now, as the ability to OTK has been added to monsters with more utility effects, this has gone the way of Borrel Dragon, not finding itself on many lists at this point in the game. But for any deck that wants to leverage its many bodies for an offensive push, this should be your go-to option. Also, the fact that it is a gun dragon with a bunch of swords on it does canonically mean that this card is a fan of Final Fantasy VIII, so thank you, Gunblades. Borrel End Dragon is a Link 5 monster with 3500 attack, requiring 3 or more effect monsters as material. It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and neither player can target it with monster effects. It can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each, and as a quick effect, you can target an effect monster on the field and a rocket monster in your grave to negate the effects of that monster on the field, and if you do, special summon that monster from your grave, and your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation. This is currently the pinnacle of Borrel design. It requires the same minimum material requirements, meaning it's not that much more difficult to get a hold of than the other Borrels, and it has an amalgamation of all of the previous one's protection effects, on top of a big multi-attack and quick effect negation, one that cannot be responded to. Not many decks are going to have an answer to that one, though you will need to have rockets in your graveyard to access the negates. But even without that, this card has the ability to tear apart entire fields with little able to stand in its way, and is a fitting member of the dragons that feature End as part of their title. And you know what they say, endings are the first part of a new beginning. The beginning of whooping your opponent's butt! Bayonet Punisher is a quick play spell card that applies the following effects in sequence depending on the types of Borrel monsters you control and that are in your grave. And if you control a monster with 3000 or more attack, your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. What a flavorful addition. For Fusion, you banish a monster your opponent controls. For Synchro, you banish 3 random cards from their face down extra deck face up. For Xyz, you banish a spell or trap card your opponent controls. And for Lynx, banish up to 3 cards from your opponent's grave. For the Borrel connoisseurs out there, this is a pretty hefty payoff for having summoned out so many boss monsters. But is it actually worth it? Well, if you at least get Furious Dragon into rotation, it's a non-targeting banish that has the potential to not be responded to, and that by itself seems pretty strong. The other effects, though, are hit and miss, with the Xyz one being the absolute worst, though thankfully X-Charge wasn't really a high priority summon. This is probably more trouble than it's worth, even under optimal conditions, and like, how can you get away with calling it Bayonet Punisher when only one of your dragons has bayonets on it? Seems like a bit of an oversight. Borrel Supplier is a continuous spell card that, during each standby phase, if you control a Borrel Link monster, you can target a rocket monster in your grave and special summon it, but destroy it during the end phase. This is a pretty neat card to have alongside your Borrels. Each standby phase gifts you with a rocket for your Borrels to utilize their effects with, and like we talked about earlier, we have a ton of effects that we can utilize with them. And even if you aren't able to fire off those rockets' gunfire effects, it'll get popped on its own during the end phase, so you'll at least still get the float. So, on top of all the other great qualities this theme has, it also has a very robust supply line. Borrel Regenerator is an equip spell card that activates by targeting a rocket monster in your grave and special summoning it, equipping it with this card, but banish it when this card leaves the field. If this card is sent to the grave because the equipped monster was destroyed, you can draw a card. So this has a couple of different modes to it. You either revive the rocket so you can use it as material for a summon, or you can pop it with your Borrels to get that rocket's gunfire effect, which also nets you a draw, helping to make up for losing that equipped spell over the course of this process. It feels weird that this wasn't translated as Borrel Reload though, considering we're filling up the chambers with rocket monsters. We could even lean into the whole Varis plays old DM era cards by referencing Reload with this one. Come on folks, get it together! Borrel Cooling is a normal trap card that you activate by tributing a rocket monster. Then you target a Borrel Link monster that you control. Equip it with this card, and if equipped to a monster by this effect, the equipped monster gains the following effect. As a quick effect, once per turn you can target a monster you control, and it can't be destroyed by a battle or card effect this turn. So since you have to tribute a specific monster and it only works on a particular different monster, what's the purpose of this? Well, the idea is that because the effect is given to the Borrel Link monster, it's not being used by cooling itself, When you use it to protect a card, it can also trigger our rocket's gunfire effects, giving you a second way to utilize those in a single turn. Though the ironic thing is that when you try to use those rocket's gunfire effects, they will destroy themselves before the Borrel cooling protection effect kicks in to save them. And outside of that, you just get to keep a monster safe every turn by utilizing this effect. But they must have some really advanced cooling technology in those dragons to keep them chill at that point, because with the double trigger, it feels like things should be overheating instead of cooling off. Execute Protocols is a continuous trap card that can be activated during any battle phase. You can banish a Dark Link monster from your grave, then target a Borrel monster you control, and until the end of the turn, it gains attack equal to the attack of the monster banished to activate this effect. This is the last resort of the Borrels. If you need a big power boost, an even bigger one than the power the monsters already have, you can trade in some of your spent Link monsters to make them even bigger. Now, on the way to make your Borrel Link monsters, you've more than likely deposited a few Dark Links into your graveyard, so you won't have to worry about not having fuel at that point. But if we want to use this to supplement our non-Link Borrel monsters, you'll have to be a bit more mindful. There's also the issue that this isn't a searchable card, nor is it an engine card, so it's hard to justify actually including this. Not to mention it is showing the Borrel monsters at their worst behavior. Hey, come on kids, it's not seafood there. If you're gonna chew your big light energy balls, keep your mouth closed. Alright, so that is all of the Varis cards, but what do we do with them? As a united front, we're going to want to summon out as many materials as possible, link up into our Borrel threats, and use our rockets to problem solve for a bit until we can swing in for lethal, and we'll be using all the dragon and link support we can get our hands on to accomplish this. So what can we play to help them out? First up, we have Star Liege Seifert. It puts our level 4 rockets into our hand, which includes Tracer, which is a great summon from hand off of cards like Boot Sector Launch. And if you don't have to send Seifert itself for that search, it's a great link for Striker Dragon so you can accomplish this. Also, while in the grave, it can recycle level 8 light or dark dragon monsters, and we have a couple that will come up later. While Borrel Load Savage Dragon and Barone are banned, we still have some really strong synchro options in Bestial Dispater and Psyframe Lord Omega. Dispater gives you interaction while recycling your banished monsters, and gives you a way to summon back your banished lights and darks. And a real good one is Psyframe Lord Omega. When you use it for its hand loop effect, if you summon it back out with Dispater's effect, it'll strand the banished card in the banishment forever while giving you the opportunity to do another hand loop. And a great way to summon out Dispater is with the rest of our main deck Bestials. Magnemute can even search you the rest of your dragons, and if you get Bestial Lubellion into rotation, that's branded Regained Access, which is huge and can combine with our level 4 tuners to make Crimson Dragon for some wacky synchro shenanigans. The new enhanced Metal Morph cards are going to be a great boon to the theme, and Dragon decks as a whole. Use enhanced Metal Morph to summon out Red Eye's Black Full Metal Dragon, and now you have an Omni Negate. Now, you have to tribute a level 5 or higher dragon to do this, so your smaller rockets won't help you here, but Exploder Rocket Dragon is easy to summon with Quick Launch, and all the Bestials can help do the same. And speaking of Red Eyes, Darkness Metal Dragon is a must-play card for how it continues to supply you with dragon monsters, and to get it as soon as possible, you'll want to play Black Metal Dragon. Sending it from the field to the graveyard will net you a Red Eyes card, including Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, along with any number of other Red Eyes support cards. I say, looking at Red Eyes Fusion. Chaos Dragon Levianeer is also a pretty sweet monster to have on hand. Banish a bunch of dark monsters, and this will also help you hand rip alongside Omega. Not to mention that this is one of the monsters we can recycle with Seifert's Grave effect. Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Frisian, is also a material machine. Sure, it costs you half your life points, but for the cost, you get a free piece of Link material or a gateway into a level 7 Synchro. Ancient Fairy Dragon is a pretty sweet option here, as you're likely to be playing both Boot Sector Launch and Dragon Ravine, so this gives you a way to pivot between the two, not to mention that it can turbo out monsters from your hand. Another version of this is by using Revolution Synchron. We can use it as a tuner from our hand, pairing well with any of our level 4 non-tuners on the field, and it can even come back as a level 1 to upgrade your Ancient Fairy Dragon into a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, giving you some monster negation. If you've been keeping up for the past few episodes, you'll know we just covered Dragoonity, and there's a big overlap between us and them. We can also make great use of Dragoonity Remus to search for Dragon Ravine, which can set up our grave with a wide variety of dragons, on top of being a great discard outlet. Alternatively, we can just link up into Romulus to accomplish something similar. But if we want a different link to, I'll point you in the direction of Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, a great piece of disruption that still grabs you a free dragon. And while many of the Guard Dragon Link monsters have been banned for being super busted, Pisty can still summon out monsters from the grave or banishment. Dragon Rulers are hard to ignore here, especially since we have access to all of them at one now. Use your spent dragons to get out more material onto the field, which is especially helpful for your extra deck monsters that need dragons as material. The same cannot be said for Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon, my personally headcanoned Light and Dark Dragon Ruler, as the card is currently banned. And banishing the elemental ones will be less impactful since we don't play as many dragons that match their attribute. But free big monsters are still big free monsters. As for a silly tech pick, Chamber Dragon Maid is at the top of my list. This requires us to be on a version of the deck that runs a lot of big dragons, so the Dragon Rulers, but you can use its on summon effect to grab you Dragon Maid Changeover, which you can then activate, fusing Chamber and any level 5 or higher dragon you have in rotation to make Dragon Maid show for an Omni Negate that turns into House Dragon Maid for a pretty good sized body. Alternatively, because Changeover can be used for any Dragon Fusion summon, and Chamber Dragon Maid is a Dark Dragon, it's another way to make Borrel Furious Dragon, so it's got some solid utility. And that's all I have to say about the Borrel Monsters and Varis' cards as a whole. It's wild how every other card was a milestone in card design. Revolver really did change the game with what dragons were capable of, which is a high bar to clear as they were already one of the game's most supported and respected monster types. And it's only going to get better from here. Cool dragons are a part of Yu-Gi-Oh's DNA, and we're always just a little while away from the next thing that will revolutionize those most mythic of creatures. It just, turns out that this time, the fantasy elements have been replaced with guns. I mean, forget all the previous barrel dragon jokes, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has never been closer to aping Digimon's designs. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are rockets and Borrels firing on all cylinders, or do we need to check our equipment one more time? And which one's your favorite? I think Furious Dragon probably has the best composition out of all of them, and it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a pretty good tech pick in Branded. Let me know your favorites down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. And speaking of those lovely patrons, I'd like to give them a thanks right now. This month's Quasar Commander is Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators are 3rd Dynasty, 50 Gigabits, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Owexa Toihime, Anansi Dragon, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Emony Chan, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Leo 458, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Mega Combi, Millennia Asta, Mern, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Serenity Towns, Skybuster Leo, The Critic of Innocence, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Ariel Kersey, Baron von Titty Sprinkles, Beelzephyr, Beluga Master, Blitzwolf, Borger with a Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper R.I.P., Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heath the True Draco Slayer, Inblink, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, Lobomaru 02, Manga Pages, Marluxia's a Girl, Matt Simmons, McSpoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Night Trummo, Nyx, Obsidian, Shizuka Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, The Legendary Raven, The Phantom Knights of Shitted Pants, The Pokemon 52, Tiger X2476, Visor KG, Zeldreka and Zalus, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you liked what you saw and want to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits, and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the links to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see more dragon shenanigans, check out this video where I cover the Dragon Rulers. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. It wasn't just the rockets that walked in front of my screen. Once again, Moby, thank you very much for this. Always a pleasure to have you as part of the casting crew. Your color commentary is a boon to all of this, and I wouldn't be able to do it without you. Thank you again so much. I have no clue why you do this, but here you are. Altergeist! You said it, Moby. You can't just capitalize the X in the middle of the name and make the monsters suck. It's not fair. Kingdom Hearts ass looking monster.